Officer Clint Darvish had fired his weapon 14 times in 11 years on the job. Every time the paperwork cleared. Every time the union rep made a call before the ink was dry. Every time the version of events that survived the internal review was his version, shaped, compressed, and submitted through channels that had been lubricated by years of mutual protection between men who understood that the badge was only as useful as the silence around it. 14 times. 0 consequences. The morning of August 14th was supposed to be the 15th. He arrived at East Precinct at 5:58, 2 minutes before his shift technically started, which he considered a form of discipline. He poured coffee from the break room machine, checked his phone for the dispatch queue exchanged. 12 words with his partner, Ray Purcell, and by 6:15 was behind the wheel of Unit 14, with the particular settled confidence of a man who has never been meaningfully wrong in public and has therefore stopped preparing for the possibility. He did not know that 2.4 miles northwest in a house on Sycamore Lane in Clover Ridge, a woman named Nadia Osei was putting on her walking shoes. He did not know her name. He did not know that she had spent the previous 11 months preparing a federal ruling that would reshape use of force accountability standards across 3 counties, including his. He did not know any of it. That was the first of his mistakes. It would not be the last. Nadia Osei had been blind for 13 years and had never once in 13 years allowed that fact to become the most important fact about her. She was 54. She had been on the federal bench for 12 years, assigned to the Civil Rights Division of the 6th Circuit, where she had developed a reputation for opinions that were precise in their reasoning, meticulous in their citation, and entirely uninterested in the comfort of people who had expected a different outcome. She had lost her sight at 41 to a degenerative retinal condition that had announced itself as blurred edges and departed as total darkness. And in the years between, she had built a life that accommodated the loss without being defined by it. A life organized by sound and memory, and the accumulated knowledge of a woman who had been navigating rooms that were not built for her since long before she lost the ability to see them. The alarm on her phone had not woken her. It never did. She was always up before it. She lay still for a few minutes in the dark of her bedroom on Sycamore Lane, listening to the neighborhood assemble. The sprinkler system 2 streets over. The mockingbird in the oak outside her window. The specific quality of silence in Fort Carlisle just before 6 in the morning, thick and residential, and for the past 4 years hers. From the corner of the room came the sound of Atlas getting to his feet. He always knew the moment she was awake. 7 years of partnership had calibrated them to each other in ways she had stopped trying to explain to people who had not experienced it. Atlas was a German Shepherd, 87 pounds, certified service animal. His green vest hung by the bedroom door beside his harness. In 4 years of morning walks through Clover Ridge and Sycamore Park, he had not once failed to do exactly what he had been trained to do. She reached down and found his head. "Good morning," she said. His tail moved against her leg. She was 1 week from delivering the most significant ruling of her career, a civil rights case, challenging the use of force policies of 3 county law enforcement agencies, 43 plaintiffs, precedent that her own clerks had characterized as potentially circuit-altering. She had written the opinion 6 times. She knew every argument, every weakness, every counter. She was in the way that mattered most to her ready. She attached Atlas's harness with the practiced ease of a daily ceremony. They went downstairs. She made coffee by touch, drank it standing at the kitchen counter, while Atlas waited by the door, with the patience that still, after 7 years, stopped her briefly in something adjacent to gratitude. Then she picked up his harness handle, and they went out into the morning. Clover Ridge was the kind of neighborhood built to look effortless. Wide streets, mature oaks, deep lawns, houses set back at distances that suggested privacy rather than distance. The kind of neighborhood where 30 years ago, a black woman walking alone would have drawn attention that had nothing to do with curiosity. It had changed in the way these neighborhoods change slowly, grudgingly, with the incremental quality of progress that arrives only when the alternative becomes more inconvenient than the progress itself. Nadia did not romanticize this. She had bought her house on Sycamore Lane because it was 4 miles from the federal courthouse, because the morning air in this part of Fort Carlisle was clean and still, and because the route she had mapped with Atlas through Clover Ridge and the adjacent Sycamore Park was almost exactly 2 miles. She knew her neighbors by the sounds they made. Mrs. Hartley, 3 houses west, was always in her garden before 7. The Alderman family ran their irrigation at 6:15. A teenager named Devin was picked up for school at 6:40 by a grandmother whose car needed a new muffler. And Warren Steck. She knew Warren Steck by the sound of his porch chair. He was 67, retired from commercial real estate, and he sat on his front porch most mornings with a coffee mug and the disposition of a man who had built his life according to a specific set of terms and was chronically personally aggrieved to find the world declining to honor them. In 4 years of proximity, he had spoken to Nadia 3 times, and each conversation had contained beneath its surface of neighborly neutrality something that required her to choose between responding to what was said and responding to what was meant. She had 3 HOA complaints against her, all from Steck, all dismissed. 1 citing excessive noise. 1 alleging Atlas had damaged his property. 1 still technically under review, which her attorney had already characterized as another exercise in documentation. In the margin of his second complaint, the HOA board secretary had written in handwriting, Nadia's clerk, Loretta, had described to her 9 prior submissions from this address. Pattern noted. This morning, Nadia and Atlas turned the corner onto Sycamore Lane's western stretch at 6:23. The air was still cool, the sun low, the pavement warm under her feet. She heard the porch chair. "Good morning," she said in the direction of his property, not because she expected a response, but because she refused to allow his silence to alter her behavior. He made a sound. Not a word. The particular sound a man makes when he wants you to know he heard you and has decided your greeting is beneath a reply. They were 3 steps past his property line when Atlas paused. Not a stop, a pause. The gentle reduction in momentum that meant a minor environmental distraction requiring no action. She felt his head orient briefly to the right toward the edge of Steck's lawn, and then he continued forward on her quiet command. 2 seconds total. A smell, a small movement in the grass, something that was over before it began. Behind them, she heard the porch chair stop rocking. She did not hear his phone come out of his pocket. She did not hear him lower his voice to the tone of a man performing alarm for an audience of 1, the emergency dispatcher, who would shortly receive the words, "Aggressive, lunging, blind German Shepherd." And there are children in this neighborhood in exactly the order they were designed to be received. She did not hear any of it. She and Atlas walked toward the park, and she was thinking about her ruling. The dispatch came through at 6:28. Unit 14, we have a 1091 at Sycamore Lane and the Clover Ridge Park entrance. Caller reports aggressive German Shepherd handler described as blind black female, unable to control the animal. Caller states dog has been threatening neighborhood children. Dog headed eastbound toward the park. Darvish picked up the radio. Unit 14 responding. He looked at Purcell. Dog call. Clover Ridge. Purcell repeated the neighborhood's name with the slight tonal elevation it produced in certain people, a reflex acknowledgement of the address's status, combined with a reflex assessment of the type of person who would be causing problems in it. He was 26 and 18 months into a career he was still learning to navigate by reading whoever was beside him. Handler can't control it, Darvish said. He was already moving toward the car. Woman's blind. Big Shepherd. There was something in his voice that Purcell filed under training without examining it closely enough. Not urgency. Not quite contempt. Something in the register between the flat pre-arrival certainty of a man who had already decided how a situation was going to go before he had seen the situation. Across the parking lot, Officer Tobias Greer, 24 years old, 7 months at East Precinct, had heard the dispatch from the break room window. He stood with his coffee and watched Darvish and Purcell's cruiser pull out. He knew Darvish's record, the way junior officers know senior officers' records, not through official documentation, but through the specific texture of what people said in break rooms and what they didn't say, and through the way certain conversations stopped when certain doors opened. 7 months. Long enough to know. He set down his coffee. He told himself he was finishing his shift and would drive past Clover Ridge anyway, which was not true, but was a manageable approximation of the truth. He got in his own unit and took the surface route 2 minutes behind Darvish. His body camera was on. It was always on. He had made that decision in his second week at East Precinct, and had not varied from it once in the specific way of a person who has already understood that the difference between his account and someone else's account of the same event is the only protection that will reliably hold. The park entrance at Sycamore Lane was marked by a low stone wall and a wide paved apron where the sidewalk widened briefly before narrowing into the park path. Nadia and Atlas had stopped there. She liked this spot. The air that came off the park in the early morning had a different quality cooler, carrying the smell of grass and the creek that ran through the eastern edge. She stood with one hand on Atlas's harness, and her face tilted slightly upward, the way she did in places she had come to know well enough to simply exist in without navigating. Atlas sat beside her. His vest caught the low morning sun. The green embroidery of the service dog certification patch on his left side was visible from 20 feet to anyone who was looking. She heard the cruiser before anything else, the specific sound of a car breaking hard, loose gravel, scattering under tires at the park's entrance, 2 car doors slamming in near unison. Atlas's ears went forward. She felt him orient toward the sound without moving his feet. "Something's happening," she said quietly to him, a habit from years of narrating her environment keeping her internal map current. She heard heavy boots on pavement. 2 pairs, moving fast. Then 2 voices arrived simultaneously, overlapping in a way that was either accidental or deliberate, and she had spent enough time in courtrooms to know the difference. "Step away from the dog, ma'am. Control your animal. Keep it restrained." Atlas did not move. He sat exactly where he was, attentive, reading the situation, waiting. Nadia raised her free hand to approximately shoulder height, a signal she had trained herself to use in tense encounters, making her hands visible and her posture legible. She kept her voice level. Level was a skill, not a state. She had been practicing it for a long time. "Officers," she said, "I am blind. The dog beside me is Atlas. He is a certified service animal. He is currently sitting at my left side under full control. We have been on this sidewalk, and we have not approached anyone. Can you tell me the reason for your response?" She heard one of them continue toward her. Heavy stride, right side dominant. The other stopped at approximately 12 feet. "Ma'am, I need you to step back from the dog. I cannot separate from my service animal in a traffic area," she said with the patient precision of someone who had explained the relevant provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act to non-compliant parties enough times to do it without condescension. He is performing his function. He is not a threat. "Can I ask your name and badge number?" Neither officer answered that question. A voice from across the street. She recognized it before he finished his first word, because she had spent 4 years learning the acoustic map of her block, and that voice belonged to Warren Steck. Officers he called from the edge of his own property arms, folded in the particular posture of a man who has done something and is now watching it happen. "That dog has been a problem on this block for months. She can't manage it. There have been incidents." "That is not accurate," Nadia said, addressing the officers rather than Steck, keeping her attention on the people in front of her, with the deliberate focus of someone who understood that looking away was not an option. Atlas has no complaint, history, no incident history. He has walked this route every morning for 4 years. Ma'am. The closer officer again with an edge that had not been there 30 seconds ago. This is your final warning. Step away from the animal. From her left, Mrs. Hartley called from her porch. That dog has never caused a problem. Not once. Ma'am, please go back inside. This was the younger officer, tighter voice, the sound of someone holding something in check. Atlas had not moved. He was still sitting. He had not barked. He had not pulled at the harness. He had not done anything that a reasonable person watching from any angle would have described as aggressive. What he had done, what he was trained to do under elevated stress, was orient his body forward, his posture, one of attention and protection. He was doing his job. She heard the change, the specific sound of a hand making contact with leather, the snap of a retention strap. She had heard enough testimony from enough plaintiffs in her years on the bench to identify that sound precisely and to know exactly what it preceded. One of the officers had put his hand on his weapon. Everything inside her went very still. "Officer," she said, and her voice dropped into the register she used in court when she needed the room to stop, not loud, but with the quality of something that filled every available space. "Whatever you are doing with your right hand, I need you to stop. Lower your voices." He is responding to the tension in this situation, not creating it. "Please lower your voices and he will stand down." From across the street, Steck called out again. "There are children in this neighborhood. Officers, that animal is dangerous." Atlas, in response to the raised voices and the accumulated pressure of the past 4 minutes, made a sound. One sound. A low, controlled warning growl from deep in his throat. Not a bark, not a movement from where he sat, not an advance of any kind. The sound a trained working dog makes when everything around it is telling it that its person is in danger. She felt the harness tighten slightly against her palm as he shifted one small movement forward and left interposing himself between the advancing officer and the woman he had spent 7 years learning to protect. "The dog is moving," someone shouted. "Control your animal." "He is not," Nadia began. She heard the younger officer say something to the first, one word or two. Urgent, clipped. Then Darvish said loudly, with the finality of a man who has made a decision and is now executing it. "Final warning." She heard Steck's voice arrive one more time. "Officers, please. There are children nearby." And she heard in it the specific quality of panic that has been manufactured, rather than felt panic, as instrument rather than response. She heard one of the officers take 2 quick steps toward her. She said, "Please. He is protecting me. He is doing what he was trained to do. Please." The gunshot cracked through the morning air with the specific violence of a sound that does not belong in a quiet suburban neighborhood at 6:30 in the morning. Sharp, enormous, wrong in a way that her body registered before her mind had processed it. And then, the harness went slack. 4 words. The entirety of the event contained in 4 words. 7 years of that harness carrying weight, carrying purpose, carrying the warm and steady living resistance of Atlas, moving through the world alongside her, and then, in one instant, nothing. The absence of pressure where there had always been pressure. The specific sensation of something essential becoming a memory in real time. She dropped to her knees on the pavement. Her hands found him by sound and memory and the geography of knowing exactly where he had been standing. Her fingers went into warm fur and then into something else. Something wet and very warm and spreading. And her hands pressed there, pressing hard, because that was what her hands knew to do. Because the body responds to its training, even when the mind is still catching up. For 3 full seconds, she made no sound. The world erupted around her from very far away, as if the gunshot had created a membrane between herself and everything else. Doors opening, voices layering over each other, a child beginning to cry somewhere, Mrs. Hartley from her porch, someone running across pavement, the sound of multiple phones, the particular double click of camera apps activating once, twice, 4 times in rapid succession. Atlas, she said. It came out quiet. Not because she was composed, she was not composed. She was somewhere beneath composition, in a place too immediate and real for the performance of any emotion, other than the simple truth of it, but because her throat had tightened to the dimension of a word. She could feel him breathing. Shallow. Fast. Wrong. He was protecting me, she said to the space in front of her, where the officers were. Her voice had the absolute evenness of a woman who had learned over a lifetime of being in rooms where the wrong kind of emotion would be used against her to keep her voice even when everything else was not. He was doing his job. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do. She heard Steck's footsteps retreating quiet, measured the specific rhythm of a man trying to exit a scene without being associated with it. She heard Darvish on his radio, situation contained. She heard Atlas's breathing change. In the 2 minutes that followed, Nadia Osei knelt on the pavement of Sycamore Lane with both hands pressed against Atlas's side, and the neighborhood assembled around her. Mrs. Hartley came off her porch in her bare feet. A man named Patterson from 3 houses down appeared with his phone already recording. The Delgado family emerged, and the mother made a sound, a long, soft descending no that carried everything the moment required. A college student named Will, who rented near the park, had been walking his own dog and arrived at the edge of the scene with his phone up in the first 30 seconds. 4 phones, 4 angles, 4 records. Atlas's breathing was becoming shallower. She could feel it under her hands, the small, increasingly labored rise and fall that had been her constant companion for 7 years, now becoming something she had to concentrate to detect. She stayed very still and very close, her forehead nearly touching his, and she did not allow herself to collapse. She allowed herself only this, the full and complete attention of someone who loves a thing that is dying, which means giving it everything and not looking away. 10 feet away, she heard Darvish and Purcell on the sidewalk, not loud enough for the gathering crowd, audible to a woman who had spent 13 years making a comprehensive instrument of her hearing. The dog moved toward me, Darvish said. That's what happened. It moved forward. A half-second pause. You saw it, not a question. A statement that was actually an instruction. Purcell did not respond immediately. The hesitation lasted approximately 2 seconds. She noted it. She filed it. Greer's cruiser arrived. Different engine sound lighter. She heard it pull in and park at a distance. 1 door. 1 set of footsteps. Then stillness. Not approaching. Just positioning. She understood. Darvish's radio crackled dispatch asking whether additional units were needed. Negative, Darvish said. Situation contained. Handler was unable to control her animal. Dog became aggressive. We responded appropriately. She heard every word of that transmission. She said nothing. She stayed where she was, hands on Atlas, and she cataloged what she was hearing with the precision of a woman who had been on the federal bench long enough to know that the difference between justice and its absence is almost always a matter of what gets recorded and when. Steck was gone. She could no longer locate his presence anywhere in the sounds around her. He had done what he came to do. He had made his exit, while he could still exit without being named. Atlas's breathing changed again. The rise and fall under her hands slowed to something that was barely a movement. Then less than that. Then a stillness that was complete, in the way that stillness is only complete once. She said his name 1 more time. She kept her hands where they were. She stood, slow and deliberate, not because she lacked the strength, but because she was choosing each movement with the specific intention of someone who understands that the next 30 seconds will be remembered and recorded and will matter in ways too important to rush. She laid her hands on her thighs as she rose. She did not wipe them. The blood on her palms and the front of her walking jacket was a fact, and she let it remain a fact, visible, unretracted, exactly what it was. She stood straight, shoulders back. She turned toward Darvish's voice. Cited people when they first encountered this quality in Nadia, the directional precision with which she oriented to sound the way she could face a person without seeing them, with an accuracy that was somehow more direct than ordinary eye contact, often described it as unsettling. She had never found a better word for it herself. It was simply what 13 years of necessity produced. She turned and faced Darvish with a directness that, despite the blood on her hands and Atlas on the pavement behind her and the gathering crowd and the recording phones and all of it, made both officers take an involuntary step backward. They did not choose to step backward. Their bodies chose for them. The crowd assembled into silence. Not quieter. Silent. The specific silence that falls when a collection of people simultaneously realizes that something larger than the immediate scene is happening, something that will still be relevant next week and next month, and in rooms and conversations that have not yet occurred. Nadia let it stand. 4 seconds of silence. Then 5. She let it breathe. She reached into the pocket of her walking jacket. What she produced was not a badge she carried. No badge wore no uniform, had no credential that lived in a billfold and caught morning light. What she produced was her phone. She pressed a contact by memory, pressed speaker, held it at chest height, facing outward, so that everyone within 10 feet could hear what came next. 2 rings. Then a voice, federal flat, the specific cadence of a government duty line staffed by someone who answered this way 100 times a day, and never once varied the phrasing, DOJ Civil Rights Division duty desk. The sound of those 4 words in the morning air of Sycamore Lane had a quality Nadia had anticipated and chose not to rush. She let them land. She let them settle over the crowd, and over the 2 officers, and over the 4 recording phones, and over the empty space where Warren Steck had been standing. Then she said in a voice she had not raised, "This is Judge Nadia Osei, 6th Circuit Civil Rights Division. Badge authorization, Delta Osei, 612. I need credentials confirmed for the officers present at this location. Please confirm my position and division for the record." A half second. Then confirmed. Judge Nadia Osei, United States Federal Judge, 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, Civil Rights Division. 12 years of service. Do you need us to dispatch, Judge? Not yet, she said. Stand by. She lowered the phone. She turned toward the sound of Darvish's breathing, and in the silence that followed, the silence that was absolute in the way that silence is absolute when a room of people is holding its breath, simultaneously, she heard something she would remember, precisely the sound of Darvish's hand moving away from his holster, not reaching for it, moving away from it. A small, involuntary repositioning. His body making a decision his mind had not yet caught up to. My name is Nadia Osei, she said, each word placed with the deliberate weight of a gavel. I am a United States Federal Judge, Civil Rights Division, 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. A pause that lasted 3 seconds. You just discharged your weapon against a certified, clearly marked service animal belonging to a sitting federal judge on a public sidewalk without warning, without documented probable cause, and on the testimony of a man who has filed 9 rejected complaints against me in 4 years. She tilted her head slightly toward where Steck had been. I heard every second of what happened on this sidewalk. So did 4 cameras. So did the DOJ duty desk, which is still on this call. From the middle of the crowd, she could not locate exactly who, a woman's voice barely above a whisper. Oh my God. That's Judge Osei. That's the civil rights judge. The words moved through the crowd in a wave. She heard it, the specific sound of recognition passing from person to person, the murmur of a name being confirmed and reconfirmed. Darvish's breathing had changed. It came faster now, shallower. The breathing of a man whose blood has gone somewhere interior and urgent, leaving the surface of him depleted. Purcell had not spoken in over a minute. From half a block away, Greer stood beside his unit. His body camera ran. He did not move. He simply bore witness, which was what he had come to do. What happened next was the thing she had anticipated, because she had spent her entire career watching how people in positions of institutional power respond when that power is suddenly publicly and irreversibly insufficient. The response was almost always the same, a doubling down born not from conviction, but from the survival-level terror of being wrong in front of witnesses and not knowing how to be wrong without being destroyed. Darvish found his voice. It came out smaller than he had intended, thinner, as if something had punctured it and it had not fully reinflated. He registered this, and he overcompensated, which only made it worse. "Ma'am," he said, and the word landed the way it always landed when it was used in that register, as a small and deliberate diminishment. "With all respect, I had a direct threat to my safety." The animal advanced on my position. "I cannot speak to your position or your credentials. What I can tell you is that we responded to a 911 report of an aggressive animal, and we followed. The animal was sitting," Nadia said. "Not loud, not faster. Precisely the same pace and register as everything she had said before. The consistency of it was more unnerving than volume would have been. He was sitting on this sidewalk from the moment you pulled up until the moment he took one step forward when you advanced toward me. He was sitting. He was not barking. He was not lunging. He made one sound, one growl in direct response to your shouting. And then he moved 3 inches to stand in front of me because you were advancing on me. And that is what a protection-trained service animal does when its handler is approached aggressively." A pause. "I know this because I have heard testimony about service animal behavior in federal court more times than you have filed incident reports, Officer Darvish." Darvish's face in Greer's body cam footage that would later be reviewed frame by frame in federal court, in a congressional hearing room, and on the front pages of 4 national newspapers, showed a progression that the forensic analyst would describe clinically as the observable sequence of a man whose prepared narrative is collapsing in real time. The jaw, the eyes, the particular set of the shoulders when a person has nowhere to retreat to and has not yet accepted this. "With respect," Darvish said, and the phrase had become in the past 90 seconds a kind of verbal reflex, the automatic hand raised in front of a face that expects impact. You were unable to see what the animal was doing. "Ma'am, with all due respect to your position, you can't see what your dog is doing. You cannot assess whether it was aggressive because you cannot see it." That is, Nadia let him finish. She waited until he was done, the way a very experienced judge waits for a very ill-prepared attorney to finish a motion that has already failed, not out of courtesy, but out of the understanding that the record is better when the record is complete. "Officer Darvish," she said when he stopped, "I want you to listen carefully to what you just said, and I want you to understand that it is now on 4 videos and a federal duty desk recording." Another pause. "You just told a sitting federal judge on a public sidewalk that she cannot assess a situation because she cannot see it. You want that to be the record. I want it to be the record too." She said it without heat, without triumph. She said it the way she delivered the most important sentences in her written opinions, with the neutral, absolute certainty of something that does not need to be angry, because it is simply true. Purcell looked at Darvish. Then he looked at the phones. Then he looked at Greer, half a block away, standing still beside his unit with his camera running. Purcell was 26 years old, and in the past 3 minutes, he had understood something that he would spend the next several months of his life deciding what to do about. Mrs. Hartley from her porch said clearly, "Someone needs to call an ambulance. For the dog. Someone needs to call right now." Darvish's radio crackled. Dispatch again receiving calls from the Clover Ridge area asking for a status update. Darvish reached for his radio. His hand was not quite steady. Captain Phil Eckhart received the call at 6:47 before Darvish's cruiser had turned out of the neighborhood. The caller was Marcus Felder, the union rep, whose sixth sense for calls that mattered had been refined by 19 years of managing exactly this category of situation. Eckhart listened. Then he listened more carefully. Then he said, "How public is this?" Felder said, "There were phones out from the first 30 seconds. Eckhart said, "Who is she?" Felder said, "That's the problem." By 8 a.m., the East Precinct's response was organized with the efficiency of an institution that had never explicitly written down this protocol because it had never needed to. Everyone in the relevant positions knew their role, the way musicians know a song they have played 1,000 times. The footage from Darvish's body cam was pulled for technical review. I, a Lieutenant Gould, who had worked under Eckhart for 6 years and had a comprehensive understanding of what his role required, was assigned to the case. Statements from Darvish and Purcell were taken with Felder present. Nadia was brought to East Precinct to give her statement at 9. She arrived with Loretta Vance, her law clerk of 9 years, who had been at Nadia's door within 20 minutes of the call and had, before pulling out of her own driveway, sent 2 words and an address to Dale Sutton, Nadia's personal attorney and former federal prosecutor. The detective assigned to take her statement was named Fowler. He was not a bad person. He was a person in a position that required him to conduct a process that had already been shaped before he sat down, and he was doing his best to perform that process with something resembling genuine attention. He used the word perception twice in the first 5 minutes. He asked with evident care whether the stress of the morning might have made it difficult to fully assess the sequence of events. Detective Fowler, Nadia said, "My blindness does not affect my hearing. My hearing is at this point in my life considerably more reliable than most people's vision. I heard every second of what happened on that sidewalk. I heard it in sequence. I can give you a timestamp accurate account of every word spoken and every sound made from the moment the cruiser pulled up to the moment the weapon was discharged. Would you like me to do that?" He said yes. She gave him 37 minutes of it uninterrupted. When she finished, she asked for the body cam footage. She was told there had been a transfer error. Technical recovery was underway. She said, "I see." The weight of those 2 words settled over Detective Fowler like something he would feel for a while. That evening, Chief Justice Alma Whitfield, Nadia's superior, called. She expressed genuine sympathy, asked how Nadia was holding up, and then said carefully that there was institutional concern about the optics of a sitting federal judge in a public conflict with law enforcement, and that she hoped Nadia would allow the internal process to work. Nadia listened to all of it. "Alma," she said, "they shot my dog, and they are lying about it." A long silence. "I know," Whitfield said, very quietly. "I know they are." "Then you know I cannot be quiet." Another silence. Then, "No, I don't suppose you can." Tobias Greer rang the doorbell at 7:14 the following morning. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, gray shirt, the slightly too careful appearance of someone who had thought about what to wear to a conversation they had been rehearsing all night. He was 24 years old, and he looked standing on her porch in the early morning light, exactly as frightened as the situation warranted. Loretta had slept on the couch. She let Greer in. "Judge Osei," he said. His voice was controlled but thin, in the way that voices are thin when a person has not slept. "I was there yesterday. I arrived 2 minutes after Darvish and Purcell. Parked half a block east." A pause. "My body camera was on. I know, Nadia said. I heard your car. Something in his exhale shifted the particular quality of relief in a person who has dreaded a conversation and found upon arriving at it that the first step is smaller than they feared. I have the footage, he said. I saved it to a personal drive before I came in this morning, before the watch commander could flag it for review. He stopped. If I give it to the department, it goes to Eckhart. Eckhart and Darvish have been since before Darvish was anything more than a patrol officer. Eckhart was. He stopped again, reorganizing. It won't go anywhere if it goes through the department. I know, Nadia said again. A small plastic rectangle was set on her kitchen table. She heard the contact. She reached out and found it. Tell me what it shows, she said. He told her. He told her in the measured, specific way of someone who has been playing footage back in their mind for 18 hours and knows it frame by frame. Atlas sitting when the cruiser arrived. Atlas still sitting when both officers approached. Atlas not barking, not lunging, not moving from position until Darvish took 2 steps directly toward Nadia, and Atlas stepped 1 step forward and left, interposing himself, doing the one thing he had been trained to do above everything else. Then Darvish's hand. Then the shot. Elapsed time from confrontation to discharge 11 seconds. And after Greer said, his voice changed register. On the sidewalk. My camera caught it. Darvish said. He stopped. The dog moved toward me. That's what happened. You saw it. He said it to Purcell. Not a question. The kitchen was very quiet. There is one more thing, Greer said. I checked the dispatch system this morning. Warren Steck, the man who made the 911 call. 3 days before yesterday, he called a number registered in the department's internal contact directory. He paused. Darvish's personal cell. The call lasted 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Loretta from across the table had already started photographing the drive and uploading the footage to 3 encrypted servers before Greer finished the sentence. So the 911 call, Nadia said, was not the first conversation between Steck and Darvish. No, Greer said. It was not. Nadia nodded once. You need an attorney before you return to the precinct. I already called one, he said. Last night. She almost smiled. Good. Dale Sutton filed the emergency federal motion by noon. 12 pages precise, naming 4 defendants. Darvish, Purcell, Eckhart, and Steck. A.D. A violation under Title II. Civil rights violation under 42. U.S.C. Section 1983. Criminal conspiracy to suppress evidence. Willful destruction of a federally protected service animal. Each count supported by evidence either already in hand or specifically identified for discovery. When Dale called to walk her through it, Nadia listened and then said, Who's been assigned to hear the motion? A pause. Conrad Reel. She was quiet for a moment. Conrad Reel had been elevated to the federal bench 6 years ago. Nadia had written his letter of support. She had told the selection committee he was precise and principled. His calendar, she said, claiming his docket is full for 3 weeks. She understood what 3 weeks meant when body cam footage was in technical recovery. She had been a judge long enough to know the difference between procedure being followed and procedure being weaponized. Pull his phone records, she said. Informally. I want to know if there's been contact with anyone at East Precinct. Loretta said from across the table, already requested. I'll have them tomorrow morning. Nadia sat with her hands flat on the kitchen table. The house was very quiet without Atlas. Not the ordinary quiet of a house, a specific shaped absence. The silence that lives in exactly the places where a sound used to be. We're going to bypass Reel entirely, she said. I'm calling the DOJ Civil Rights Division directly, not the local circuit, not internal channels that are already showing signs of I'm calling the deputy director. She called that evening. She gave the deputy director everything. Dates, badge numbers, Greer's footage, the Steck Darvish phone records, Darvish's disciplinary history, and the specific pattern of a body cam footage transfer error occurring within hours of an incident in which a federal judge was the complainant. The deputy director was quiet for a moment after Nadia finished. "I'll have a team assigned first thing tomorrow," she said. "I need it today," Nadia said. Another pause. "Today?" "Yes." The federal investigation was opened at 5:17 that evening. The local case was superseded. Loretta's phone record request came through the following morning, 4 calls between Conrad Reel's personal cell and the East Precinct Administrative Office in the 48 hours following Atlas's shooting. 2 of those calls after Reel was assigned. The trap as Darvish had intended it was in place. He had simply built it on the wrong side. The video Mrs. Hartley had recorded from her porch, standing in bare feet on cold wood hands, shaking slightly for the duration of the confrontation, through the moment of the shot, went online at 11:42 Friday night. She had sat with it for 16 hours. Then her daughter, who understood how the world moved, now said quietly and firmly, "Mom, you have to post it. By Saturday morning, 400,000 views. By Saturday afternoon, over 1 million. The footage was unambiguous in the way good evidence is always unambiguous. Not dramatic, not constructed, simply a record of what occurred. It showed Atlas sitting. It showed his vest. It showed the officers arriving with speed and volume disproportionate to the stillness they encountered. It showed Nadia's raised hand, her composed posture, her repeated identification of Atlas as a certified service animal. It showed Atlas's single movement, one step protective, and it showed the shot. And in the 8 seconds after the shot, it showed Darvish holstering his weapon and not moving to assist, not calling for help, turning toward Purcell. The internet, which can be many things, is sometimes a functioning instrument of consequence. By Sunday, the footage had been seen by editorial boards, cable networks, 42 members of Congress, who mentioned it by name, the Disability Rights Advocacy Coalition, the National Service Dog Foundation, and researchers at 3 accountability organizations who had frame-by-framed it and posted their analysis in threads that themselves had hundreds of thousands of views. Loretta issued a statement. Judge Osei is cooperating fully with the federal investigation. She asks only that the same standard of evidence that applies in every courtroom in this country apply here. 30 words, every word chosen. On Saturday morning, Eckhart placed Greer on administrative leave protocol review. By Saturday afternoon, a civil rights attorney named Morgan Ashby had issued a press release calling it retaliation against a whistleblower, and by that evening, Greer was sitting in Ashby's office, giving a recorded interview to a journalist at a national outlet measured specific unhurried. He described what he had seen, what he had done, and why. His voice did not shake. Warren Steck received his federal civil subpoena on Monday morning. Phone records. 911 call, recording all 9 HOA, complaints against Nadia, and the personal phone records for 30 days preceding Atlas's death. His attorney called Dale Sutton within 2 hours. The attorney said his client would cooperate. Dale Sutton said, "I know he will." The police union issued a revised statement, Wednesday notably absent of the phrase "followed protocol," and notably absent of the names Darvish and Purcell. A reporter asked whether this represented a withdrawal of support. The union's legal director said the union had no further comment at this time. Nadia, at her home on Sycamore Lane, tracked all of it through Loretta's briefings and her own reading. She filed briefs. She prepared for deposition. She went back to her chambers midweek with Loretta beside her and a cane in her right hand where Atlas's harness had been, and she returned to work on the ruling that was still despite everything, 7 days from its delivery date. She was going to deliver it on time. She had decided this on the sidewalk in the minutes after the shot. The work did not stop because someone had tried to make her stop. In fact, the work continued precisely in order to answer that attempt. The federal trial opened 6 weeks later. Nadia sat at the plaintiff's table for the first time in her career, to the left of Dale Sutton, on the other side of the bar, from the bench she had occupied for 12 years. She was aware of the strangeness of the geometry. She set it aside. She was here to win. The trial lasted 3 days. Greer testified first. He took the stand in civilian clothes, no longer an employee of East Precinct, having resigned rather than return after the administrative leave, and he spoke in the measured, specific way of someone who has been waiting a long time to say something in a room where it would be entered into a permanent record. His body cam footage was played frame by frame with timestamps. A digital forensics expert walked the jury through the sequence. Atlas sitting. Atlas still sitting, the moment Darvish's hand moved to his holster before Atlas made any movement at all. The 11 seconds between Atlas's single forward step and the discharge of Darvish's weapon. 11 seconds displayed on a courtroom screen as a timeline with each available option. Darvish had not chosen annotated beneath it. Verbal command. Step backward. Less lethal deterrent. Waiting. 11 options in 11 seconds, none of them taken. When the forensics expert finished, the courtroom was very quiet. Then Steck took the stand. He was 67, and he looked in the clean institutional light of the federal courtroom, exactly like the sum of what he had done. Not monstrous, not dramatic, simply small, in the way that people who trade in small cruelties eventually become, when those cruelties are laid on a table in their entirety and examined. Dale Sutton let him answer the first questions easily. Name, address, how long he had lived on Sycamore Lane, how long he had known Nadia Osei by sight. Yes, they were neighbors. Yes, he had filed complaints with the HOA. He characterized them as legitimate concerns about community standards. His voice was composed. Then Dale Sutton said, "I'd like to draw your attention to Exhibit 14C. The phone records went up. Every screen in the courtroom showed the same thing, a call from Steck's personal cell to a number registered in the East Precinct internal directory as Darvish's personal cell. Timestamp 3 days before the shooting, 8:23 p.m. Duration, 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Dale Sutton did not ask a question. He let the exhibit exist. The jury read it. The gallery read it. The court reporter typed. The clock on the wall moved. Steck's attorney made an objection that Judge Meade overruled without looking up from her notes. Mr. Steck, Dale Sutton said, "Can you tell me what you discussed with Officer Darvish on the evening of August 11th? Steck said he could not recall the specifics of the conversation. Dale Sutton said, "The call lasted 11 minutes and 47 seconds. You cannot recall any of it." Steck said his memory was not always reliable for details. Dale Sutton picked up the 911 call transcript from the table in front of him. He began to read it aloud. Not excerpts. All of it. In full. The specific words Steck had used about Atlas. The specific words he had used about Nadia's blindness. She can't see what her animal is doing. The specific phrase he had added at the end of the call, which the truncated version provided by the department had omitted. She doesn't belong in a neighborhood like this. I've tried to raise this with the association. Nobody listens. Dale Sutton read those words, and then he sat down. He did not ask another question. He let the transcript complete itself in the air of the courtroom and do the work that words do when they have been said aloud in a room where their entire meaning is finally visible. The jury sat with it. The gallery sat with it. Steck sat with it, his attorney's hand on his arm, his composure intact in the way that composure is intact when it is the only thing left. In the back row of this gallery, Tobias Greer sat with his hands folded in his lap. He had come for the verdict. He had come for this. He watched Steck on the stand, with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a specific thing to be said aloud in a room where the saying of it is permanent. On day 3, Darvish's disciplinary record was unsealed. 7 prior complaints, 3 involving dogs, 1 in which a restrained and leashed civilian dog had been shot during a domestic dispute call. Complaint filed, reviewed by Eckhart, closed without investigation in 3 days. 2 other excessive force complaints, both resolved through the same channel, the same reviewer, the same outcome. The pattern was not ambiguous. It was the record of a man whose behavior had been covered rather than corrected across 11 years by a structure that knew what it was doing. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 20 minutes. When Judge Meade's clerk came to the door of the waiting room, Nadia heard it in the quality of the movement, the specific purpose of someone arriving to say something they know will change the room. She stood before the clerk spoke. The jury had reached a verdict. She walked back into the courtroom. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table. She folded her hands in front of her, and she waited in the way that a woman waits when she has been waiting for something for a long time and has made peace somewhere along the route with the understanding that waiting and certainty are not the same thing, but that she has done everything within her power to make them adjacent. Guilty on all counts. Civil rights violation, guilty. ADA violation, guilty. Conspiracy to suppress evidence, guilty. Willful destruction of a federally protected service animal, guilty. Darvish was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. His law enforcement license was revoked permanently. His pension was forfeited. Purcell, who had taken a plea and testified for the prosecution, received 18 months of probation and a permanent bar from law enforcement. He had given his testimony with the particular careful completeness of someone who has made a decision about what kind of person they intend to be going forward and is performing that decision in real time. Nadia had listened to his testimony and made no comment. He had been a witness who had functioned correctly in the end. That was what witnesses were for. Eckhart was tried separately on obstruction charges and convicted. Stripped of rank pension, forfeited 3 years federal prison. Judge Conrad Reel resigned before formal removal proceedings reached their second session. He issued a statement expressing regret for any appearance of impropriety. Nadia noted the word appearance and said nothing about it publicly because she had said everything that needed saying about Conrad Reel by building a case so complete that his conduct had become its own testimony. Then Judge Meade, the sentencing judge, not Reel, not anyone with any prior connection to any party in the room, turned to Warren Steck. Steck stood at the defendant's table. He was 67, and he was smaller than he had been on his porch. Perhaps it was the room. Perhaps it was 6 weeks of understanding the dimensions of what he had initiated from a rocking chair on a Friday morning. Judge Meade said she wanted to read something into the record before sentencing. She read the transcript of Darvish's body cam footage from the confrontation. Not all of it. One specific section time-stamped the moment, 3 minutes and 40 seconds after the cruiser arrived, when Darvish, advancing toward Nadia, raised his voice and said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, you cannot see what your dog is doing. You cannot assess whether it is a threat. That is not your fault, but it is the situation." Judge Meade read those words aloud. Then she looked up. "This court finds it instructive." She said that Officer Darvish characterized blindness as a limitation in the capacity to assess a threatening situation. She paused. Officer Darvish was mistaken about who was limited on that sidewalk. The evidence makes this plain. She looked back down at the record. Judge Ossie heard 11 seconds of decision-making time that Officer Darvish had available and did not use. She heard a dog that was not barking. She heard a crowd that was not afraid. She heard a man whose version of events changed between the sidewalk and the radio call. She heard all of it, clearly, in sequence, without error. The courtroom was completely still. Her blindness was not the limitation that morning, Mr. Darvish. It was yours. In the back row of the gallery, Tobias Greer sat very still with his hands folded. He had promised himself he would not make any sound when the verdict came, or when the sentences were read, or in any moment from the time he sat down until the time he left the building, because this was not his moment, and he understood that. He kept the promise. He sat still. He watched. And when it was over, when the room began to move again, when voices returned, when the official dissolution of the session released everyone back into the ordinary world, he sat for a moment longer. Then he stood, and he went out into the afternoon, and he took a long breath of Fort Carlisle air, and he thought about 11 seconds. Steck was convicted on both counts: false emergency report, criminal conspiracy, and sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation, a $25,000 fine, and 500 hours of community service. He was barred from filing any formal complaint of any kind against Nadia Osei for a period of 10 years. His attorney called it a fair resolution. Nadia, outside the courthouse on the broad stone steps in the late afternoon light, with Loretta to her right and Dale to her left, heard the crowd that had gathered on the plaza below. Not a protest, not organized, just people who had followed the story and had come without anyone coordinating their presence to be present for the end of it. Justice for Atlas, they chanted. Justice for Atlas. She stood still on the courthouse steps. She did not gesture. She did not perform anything. She let the sound reach her. The sound of several hundred people saying the name of a German shepherd who had spent 7 years making her world navigable and had spent his last 9 minutes trying to keep her safe. After a long moment, she said quietly to Loretta, "Take me home." Loretta said yes. They went. 3 months after the verdict, Nadia Osei returned to the bench for the first time. She arrived at the federal courthouse on a Tuesday morning in October at her usual hour, with a new service dog beside her, a 2-year-old German shepherd named Covenant, already trained, already learning the particular rhythm of her stride, already becoming the living architecture of her days. His harness was green. His vest bore the same certification patches Atlas's had borne. He was not Atlas. He was not meant to be. He was his own animal, with his own way of moving through the world. And she had spent 8 weeks learning him the way she had learned everything else in her life, with patience, with attention, and with the understanding that good things require time to know properly. On the courthouse steps, a crowd had gathered. Not protesters, not press, simply people who had followed what happened and had chosen without coordination to be present for this particular morning. They were quiet when she stepped out of Loretta's car, and then they were not quiet, and the sound that rose was the particular sound of people choosing to be somewhere that matters to them. She walked up the courthouse steps with Covenant's harness in her left hand. At the top, she paused, face toward the October sky, the morning air cool and clean on her skin for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went inside to work. The legislation that passed Congress the following spring carried Atlas's name. Its passage moved through committee with the resistance that attends any legislation requiring people with institutional interests to vote against those interests. But it moved, and it passed with broader support than its sponsors had projected. The Atlas Act established federal criminal penalties for the killing or injuring of a certified service animal by law enforcement acting without documented probable cause. It mandated body camera retention for all incidents involving service animals for a minimum of 5 years. It required a training for all sworn officers receiving federal funding. It created an independent review board with subpoena authority for disability-related misconduct claims. Nadia did not attend the signing ceremony. She had been invited. She declined. She was on the bench presiding over a housing discrimination case in 3 counties, and the case was where she was needed. Dale Sutton attended and sent her a text from the ceremony that contained 1 word: done. She read it during a recess, sat with it for a moment, and returned to the bench. Warren Steck's house on Sycamore Lane sold at a loss that November. He left Fort Carlisle without announcement, in the quiet way of a man whose departure goes unremarked, because his presence had become untenable. The neighborhood he had spent years trying to manage as an expression of his particular fear did not mark his going. On the corner of Sycamore Lane and the park entrance path, At the exact coordinates where Atlas had fallen, the Clover Ridge Neighborhood Association voted at its October meeting to place a small marker. It was not a protest, and it was not a statement addressed to anyone. It was a flat stone flush, with the sidewalk engraved with 2 lines in plain block lettering, Atlas. He did his job. Mrs. Hartley called Nadia on a Sunday to describe it carefully, quietly, giving her every detail. Nadia listened with the phone held close, and when Mrs. Hartley finished, she said thank you, and sat for a while in her kitchen with the phone still in her hand, in the particular silence of someone who is sitting with something that is both a loss and a completion, and who has learned over a long life of navigating darkness that those 2 things are not mutually exclusive. Outside in the back of the house, she could hear Covenant moving through the yard, his steps slightly different from Atlas's, his weight distributed differently, his particular way of pausing, that she was still learning the meaning of. She sat with that sound for a while. Then she stood up, and she went to let him in. If this story and Atlas stayed with you, please subscribe to our channel. We find the stories where the right person was in the right place and where justice eventually finds its way home.